Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis today, we'll be discussing 5 interesting topics out of the Hindu newspaper. But before we begin, as always, if you like our initiatives, do like, share and subscribe to the session. And as soon as this session is over, we will have 5 questions for you ready on the Telegram channel itself, and you should practice the same topics immediately after the session. Therefore, revision happens through the whole process itself. So, with this, let's look at the topics for today. And the first one is related to UNESCO World Heritage Tag and something related to art and culture. Art and culture is now becoming more and more dynamic. It is coming through the concept of current affairs itself. And in that context, this becomes interesting because there's no World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Northeast, and that is the focus of this article. And now what we need to understand is, what is this area they're talking about? What is the monument itself? What is the potentiality and what is the implication? As always, I'll give you the basic context first, then we'll go into the nitty-gritty of the session, and thereafter we'll look at the PPT and then we'll summarize in that sense. So, good morning, and I hope all of you are doing well. So, first point, the most important aspect related to nomination to UNESCO World Heritage Tags is that we have a lot of important diverse types of monuments all across India. So we are a diverse country, unity in diversity. So a very interesting thing which happened is that out of the 52, a list which was provided to the Prime Minister itself, a very interesting monument has been chosen to be nominated for the UNESCO World Heritage Tag, and that is called the Maidans. So please mind my pronunciation. I am extremely sorry for that because they are very specialized words. But the Maidans are actually proper vaulted mounds, or what are called burial mounds in Assam, in a place called Charaideo, and they are one of the most interesting aspects of the Ahom culture itself. And now what happens is that the Ahom kingdom, and over and above that, this type of a monument comes into picture. So the first point which I'm trying to say is a very interesting. If you have gone through any standard book, you would have not heard about this monument itself or these types of burial mount itself. The only burial mount which we do generally is technically stupas. Stupas are Buddhist expression of burial mounds. We have different concepts of burial mounds all across our history, from the Vedic period to the Buddhist period itself. However, there is a gap where we don't talk about these things, and in the Northeast, in Assam itself, we have a very specific, and these are technically called the pyramids of Assam, because the whole concept is the same, which is to keep the material remains of their kings. Royalties are close to 386 or 380 of these, but 90 of them are extremely important, very well maintained, which are the Ahom kingdoms itself and the kings itself, and they are a very good specimen of the culture of Assam and the basic way in which the architecture was changing in this sector. So it's a very, very important moment. Now you have to learn this for the examination, be it mains, be it prelims. You can expect a question, front page, this article was there. Now, the mount itself, this has a very beautiful structure, and the fact is that it has an octagonal half-made wall and a very beautiful pavilion on the top. There's a rudimentary form of this also where there's no pavilion, but the aspect here is that these pavilions, as they're called, Chali they're called. This is called Chali. The Chali, which is on the top itself, is a amalgamation of what we call as, because it's a medieval period in which this was developing, it's an amalgamation of the concept of what we call as the sloping roof of Bengal, and also the new type of concepts of arch and dome which was coming through. Therefore, it's an amalgamation of the culture of what we call as the Indo-Islamic culture plus the Pala, or what we call as the Bengali architecture, and therefore it produces a very unique form of concept. So within that, You can go inside into it. It is divided into vaults. It would have chambers inside it, and this pavilion marks the top of that mount. So as I said, stupas have a similar structure with the hermika on the top and the anda itself. It looks like a half stupa, but it is a very specific thing which is there in Assam, and with vaulted chambers and the chauchali, you need to know the basic structures also. And over and above that, this is something which we don't know about. A selective amnesia towards these monuments. If looked from the top, we know that there are octagonal, 8 different sides. We have one with chauchali, one without also. So servants of the king or not important people were put under these chambers without the chauchali or the open pavilion on the top. But 90 of them very beautifully preserved by the Assam government also. And somehow this beauty has evaded all of us, and now it is in front of us, and we need to appreciate, respect and understand, because this is going to create a context in which a question can come in the examination. So the first and foremost point is UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We have to nominate sites. We have for the first time nominated a northeastern site, proper concept of what we call as pyramidal structures or what we call as vaulted chambers, within which we have the kings of the Ahom kingdom and the material remains. And because the Ahoms themselves are very, very important in the story of Assam and Northeast, how they resisted the British, how they were legendary for their fighting with the British itself, and their medieval history from 1228 to 1826. It's a long period, 600 years of proper good rule in Assam. This is now an important thing which you need to keep in your mind. So you understand why we are doing this topic? Art and culture, current affairs coming together. You need to be very, very wary of what we are doing right now. And this is a new concept, totally new. This is not in standard books. It's a thing which you need to be very, very conscious of now. So as I said, the center has decided to nominate the Assam's Chardio Maidams, which are equivalent, Ahom equivalent to Egyptian pyramids. And this is a very important site, and it has a lot of, remember, it has a lot of potential to get it also, because it's very unique and it has its own culture around it in that sense. So these Maidams were built by the Ahom kingdom and the Ahom kings itself, 1228 to 1826, and this was the first capital of the Ahoms. That is why this area is very, very important, the Chardio area. And we have some of them scattered around in Jorhat and Dibrugarh also. And it is a very important burial tradition. Now understand this. It's a very important burial tradition of the Thai Ahom. Thai Ahom. Remember a very important what we call as ethnic identity within the Ahoms. Thai Ahoms, it's a specific burial practice of the Thai Ahoms. And as I said, they are structured vaults, meaning that when you go inside it, they're properly vaulted chambers with earth put on them to make it like a mount. And the dome is topped by an open pavilion called the Chauchali, and there is a dwarfed wall, meaning half wall around it in octagonal shape. This is the most important features. This is what can come in the examination itself. And now we need to understand the importance. Why are we doing this? And these things need to go into a mains answer. These things can be asked in the examination. So, no World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site in Northeast, which in itself is very unfortunate, and we need to change that, because Northeastern culture, very, very important, equally beautiful, and a very important part of Indian culture and art in that sense. So there is a need to give visibility to these monuments in that sense. As I said, Chardio was the first capital of the Ahom dynasty, founded by Chaolung Siukafa in 1253. Then, as I said, there are close to 386 Maidams, meaning these whole structure, 386, but 90 of them are very, very well preserved because of the aspect related to how they are king based. They are the ones which are in kings. And the the vaults technically have the material remains of Ahom royalty, but the most important aspect, this nomination also intersects the birth anniversary of a legendary general of the Ahoms, which is Lachit Barphukan. Please remember, he was a legendary general, fought the British. The British used to shiver on his name. So there are three very basic aspects and very important facts coming together. First, no UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Northeast. Second, the Maidans themselves, the concept, the structure itself, and how the nomination comes at a very significant moment of the 400th birth anniversary of a legendary general coming out. And he was also the ones, he fought the Mughals, and the British used to shiver on his name because of the way he fought the Mughals. There was a legend in Assam that if he was there, the British would have never ever entered into the Ahom kingdom itself. He fought the Mughals totally, but I'm talking to you about the legend of him, that he was a legend in himself in Assam, and even generations after, close to 200 years after his fight with the Mughals, even the British used to actually fear him. This is called being a legend. Are you getting my point? I know he didn't fight the British. The fact of the matter is, the British used to hear his name and they used to shiver because people used to say that he's back. That is the legend of Lachit. That is the basic point I'm trying to push. So please, for the purpose of the examination, understand the Maidans. Thereafter, you understand their structure. Now you understand a major gap in our UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And because this statement can come in the examination. And as of right now, this is a correct statement, but it looks like an extreme statement. And the fact that we have such important personalities coming out of Northeast, fighting the Mughals, and even 200 years later, the British used to shiver in his name. Make sense, everybody? What do we have to remember here? The basic 3 points. First, the structure, Chauchali, vaulted, octagonal 8 sides. Further, the aspect related to UNESCO World Heritage Sites not being here in the northeastern sector itself, and over and above that, that it coincides with a very important personality's 400th birth anniversary. Perfect? Great. So remember, he fought the Mughals, but his legend, still known, still revered, very, very important. Now, the next topic is an interesting one, which is a very fundamental question, which is China technically going through a crisis, which is that why is the Chinese population shrinking? Though technically, it does not have a bearing on us directly, but it indirectly is giving us an important advantage over the long run, and therefore it becomes important to understand. So as I said, we'll go into the details later. Let's try to understand the basic point. Their population agency has pointed out that there has been a drop of population in 2022 by 8,50,000. 8,50,000. There is a drop in their population, which means that basically death rate was higher than the birth rate. So they didn't break even. More deaths, less births, then only you technically get a major gap like this. Further, what we see is the fact that the data which is showing the trend of population is showing that the Chinese are not going to come back very soon out of this hole which they created for themselves, and therefore we need to be very, very clear. We need to be very, very clear of how governance and population policy can have a bearing on a country. So there's a larger concept, GS paper 1, GS paper 2, related to governance and what we call as social issues. That whatever a government does, there is implication on that. There is implication. And now the Chinese have put themselves in such a hole that they are actually desperate to come out of it. So what is the core issue here? As I said, this is a very major thing, that 8,50,000 people, there's a deficit. And that deficit means that birth rate is not matching the death rate, or technically the birth rate is very low to the death rate as of right now, and I will show you the data also. So everybody knows that what is the reason. The reason standard everybody knows is one child policy. Everybody says that because the Chinese followed this concept of one child, you cannot have more than one child. If you have the second child, either forced abortion or you had what is called financial sanctions in a way were done on a person. They had to pay a lot of money for the second child. So they discouraged the second child. But if you look at the more systemic problems, in China there's also two more trends, which is that fewer people are marrying, and second, if they're marrying, they are even now choosing to only have one child because of the cost of education, healthcare, and the cost of living itself. An estimation is that from 13 million married couples, they've come down to 8 million. And the average age of marriage from 24 to 27. I'll give you the exact data, but I'm trying to give you a basic understanding here. That they started with the concept of one child. They abandoned it in 2016 when they realized that the demographic data is getting skewed. But since 2016 also, they still are under the same type of regime because the people have internalized this concept. Firstly, in Japan, in the world generally, there's a new trend, marrying late and not having multiple children. And now China did not realize this behavioral change which will come within the world, or generally because of the fact that they were too adamant that their one child policy is working. But it has now created such a crisis that what we believe is that in 2011, the Chinese labor force peaked, meaning that the maximum labor force or working population, if you want to say, between 16 to 59, has now peaked in the first year of this decade itself, or last decade in that sense. And now in 2022, there are a lot, or 2023 rather, there are a lot of implications, economic implications of a falling workforce. So again, to give you a basic idea, 62% of their population as of right now is considered to be working population, and 20% is considered 60 plus. But by 2050, what all the data is suggesting is that 60 plus population is going to become 35%, which is a very high number. And with 35%, what is going to happen is that basically the healthcare cost, the pension cost, and an aging population does not actually help in the context of a industrializing or a developing country or developed country in that sense. So their labor force is going down, and when labor force goes down, China's advantage with the world was what? That it could give you cheap labor. Cheap labor because it had too much population. Now what is happening is wages have started to rise. So now China's basic advantage was not its quality. It has never been its quality, or its cheapness. And that cheapness technically was based on very, very low labor cost. But if you don't have labor, people will not want to work, and then you have to pay them a higher wage, which technically takes away the comparative advantage of the Chinese. This is the basic point, that China is extremely concerned that the way things are, first, consumption and demand is going to go down. Furthermore, the labor cost is going to go up, which in turn would mean that the comparative advantage which China has over the world, which was low labor costs, will technically be gone. And now they are desperate to come out of this spiral. However, be it 1, now they went to 2, now 3, the behavioral change within the Chinese is something which is extremely concerning. Right? Makes sense? What is the basic point here? What we are actually discussing? The core issue, which is China's advantage over the world. Come on, everyone. Make sense? Okay. So if it makes sense, then let's look at the basic data given in the article itself. So China's National Bureau of Statistics has pointed out that the country's population has fallen by 8,50,000 in the year 2022, and this decline is the first decline since 1961, when the country had a major famine after the Great Leap Forward Mao's campaign failed. So the basic point of the matter is very, very simple, which is that this is a very concerning aspect. And if you look at the data very, very closely, their birth rate is actually now lagging behind their death rate, which is even more concerning in that sense. So why this trend? The trend in which they started with a major gap between their birth and death rate. Now their death rate is higher, birth rate is lower. 10.41 death rate, 9.56 birth rate, which is a major gap in that sense, because it's going to push forward the problem itself. And it was all because of the one child policy which comes through in 1979, but thereafter it's the way they did not understand the larger context. So the birth rate in China has declined, and that we know, because of the one child policy which was introduced in 1979 with the concept of forced abortions and fiscal or financial penalties. But there's also the other two aspects. Young Chinese are marrying later, having fewer kids, and foregoing having children altogether. Some of them don't choose to have children itself. And the number of married couples between 2013 and 2020 has gone down from 13 million to 8 million. So it's technically halving in a way. And for the first time, their birth rate fell below the death rate, and there's a 10% drop in 2021. And the Chinese are not very credible with data. We know they're manipulating it. But even when they're manipulating it, still, it is such a bleak picture. Because we know they would be manipulating the data, but it is still such a bleak picture after manipulation. So China is in a problematic space, and the implication therefore would be on the economy. And the economic implication, as I said, is that the working age 16 to 59, there is a decline from the aspect of having 875 million, which is 62% of the population. Since 2010, this is 75 million less, close to 7 crore. And the above 60 population, which is technically liability in that sense, or economically, because they don't work, but now they technically go into what we call social security schemes in that sense, was 20%, but that now has gone up and is going up, and by 2050 it should be 35% of the population, which is a very substantial part when it comes to the concept of, when it comes to the non-working population or 60 plus population. China's labor force peaked in 2011, 925 million, and it will likely drop to 700 million by 2050. You see, 875 they are right now, 175 less, and this means that it will not be able to compete with India, which has a very major demographic dividend as of right now, and comparably we would have a 20-30% advantage in that sense. The fact of the matter is, this is raising the concept that industries may move out to Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, or to India, because the most important advantage, which was labor for the Chinese, is going away. The Chinese are actually in a very concerning position, and their response has also been very, very weird. One, they abandoned the concept in 2016. Then they went for two-child policy, but no one cares because healthcare and cost of living and education, the wages are shrinking, income is shrinking, people don't want to have more children. So they went for in 2021 a third 3-child policy, which is you have 3 children and we will give you what is called incentives over the third children. So they are literally incentivizing the children after the second one. But the fact of the matter is this is not going to arrest this decline because this is now becoming systemic. So very simply, don't have to learn this data. We have to look through this data and understand what it means for India. India is now in a very good position to overtake China generally as a manufacturer because we still have that advantage. Second is China in itself has technically created this massive problem for themselves because they followed a certain policy. That also is a cautionary tale for governance, that manipulation of population artificially via policy and governance doesn't make sense. It has to come as a behavioral concept. China is technically paying the price for a behavioral change in the world itself, which is right now based on the concept of what? Which is based on smaller families, one child, not too much expenditure on children, with the falling incomes and COVID-19 pandemic, though it was important. And understand, even with the pandemic which saw higher birth rates, China is still struggling, right? So this topic is both a cautionary tale and a story of opportunity for India, but you need to understand the implication of what is happening. 35%, which you see, Japan is already reeling this issue. They already are at the 35-40% mark, and they also have the same type of culture. A good working population percentage is considered to be 60, 70, 80%. But with 35% 60 plus, it would mean that it would go below 50 to 55%, which is dangerous in that sense. Right? Clear? Can we move on? Basic point clear? What is the concept of this? See, population till one point is good, because if you have population, you have demand. But too much population is also not good. The moral of the story isn't that we technically go for more children. That is an oversimplification. Working population needs to be within a certain space, and that working population should be skilled. So the more people you have to educate them also. Right? Okay, perfect. Now, the third topic is related to science and technology diseases, measles and rubella, both viral diseases, and impact children. See, measles and rubella are two viral diseases which have the same symptom, rash and fever. One impacts the child itself, and the second a pregnant woman, and then can lead to deformities to children at the fetus level and after birth in that sense. And the irony here is that both have vaccines. Measles and rubella both have proper vaccines, and India set a target that it would eliminate it by 2015. We then moved it to 2019. We then moved it to 2020. And because of the pandemic, we pushed it to 2023. And this article technically is talking about a very important question. Is that are we going to meet the concept of 100% elimination of measles and rubella? Because close to 1 lakh children die every year because of measles, and can also lead to disability to children after birth. Therefore, what is the roadmap we followed? And a good news in that sense is we'll easily be able to reach 95%. And it's about the last 5% how we reach, because be it Mission Indradhanush or the immunization program before it, and the way things are right now, we have a very robust system in place. And the article technically talks about a very important moment. The moment was that there was an outbreak in Maharashtra in which 16 children died because of measles. So virologists said that what is the issue? And they said that that was technically correction, because in 2019 and 2020, because of COVID-19, there was no outbreak. So the basic point of the matter is that as of right now, what we believe is that measles, rubella, we have the potential to meet our target, which is that by end of this year, we can eliminate this disease, which is totally preventable. But we need to be committed with our machinery in that sense to make sure that all of these preventable diseases can be prevented. So what is more important for you in the examination are two very basic things. First, related to the fact that what is measles and rubella. But the second is that do we have vaccines in that sense? Yes, we have. And for mains examination, you need to talk about, because 2023 is the year of eliminating, can we achieve it or not? Can we achieve it or not? So, India has set a target to eliminate MR, which is called measles and rubella, by 2023. And we already have missed two targets, technically three targets, 2015, 2019 and 2020. And we should be on course to covering them. So why is this target critical? It is critical because we know that measles kills close to 1 lakh children every year globally. And the fact of the matter is both of them have a safe and effective vaccine available. So it's a preventable disease. And measles has a high fatality rate, and rubella technically impacts women, pregnant women, which can lead to birth defects. So it can create a disabled child. Now, how has India strategized this? This is very important for the mains aspect. How has India strategized it? India has strategized it via, between 2010 and 13, it technically conducted what are called phased immunizations for children of age 9 months to 10 years in the 14 states with close to 119 million children covered. But what happens is that in 2014, this government introduced a very important, very important scheme, which is Mission Indradhanush. You need to remember this. Used to be very important, but now again is important because being in the news puts it into focus. So this was about immunizing everybody with the basic 8 vaccines, and measles and rubella were there. So during 2017 and 2021, India adopted a proper national strategy to cover these two, and India succeeded and has covered. Technically we are at the 90% mark. 90% coverage is there as of right now, and we have been going district by district, giving them targets for immunization, and this is the way we are actually covering it. So we have a very good program. We have a very good program which is there. Now the problem, as I said, is we've reached 90%. It's the last 10%, and we can reach 95% for sure. The 5% is what we are actually extremely concerned about, because the machinery needs to be effectively pushed in. And with a recent outbreak, we need to see that this episode does not get repeated anywhere. So the basic point is what we want. What we want is immunization, surveillance, and very simply, step by step, district by district, target based coverage. That's it. Because the article is not very clear about the way it wants to go forward, but the most important word which they've used is what is called immunization surveillance, and the aspect of coverage and the last 5%. So what have we done till this point? We've covered 3 topics. First, we discussed an important cultural aspect of the Northeast, Ahom Kingdom, and the Maidams. We understood the structure, we understood the concept of vaulted chambers, the burial mounds, the Thai Ahoms, and we discussed a very important personality who fought the Mughals, and as all of you pointed out, defeated the Mughals 17 times. His legend was so big, was so important, that even 200 years later, the British, when they fought the Ahoms, when they used to hear his name, they used to technically fear him. That is the power of that personality. Second, we then discussed why is China technically struggling with its population, how the one-child policy has technically totally in a way destroys its what we call as demographic dividend, and more than that, it is now creating systemic issues with regard to birth and death rate. We understood the behavioral changes which are coming through, and we also understood how these behavioral changes are not something specific to China but all across the world, and how it creates an opportunity for India. And this topic is more about these two diseases which are in focus now. You need to understand for both vaccines are available, and we need to make sure that we have the machinery in place. We can go for 100% immunization and not technically meet this target in 2023. Make sense, everyone? These three, then I move to the last two. Small ones but interesting ones equally. Okay, perfect. Now comes China and what China knows well, which is create problems on borders. So if you remember, last week discussed the northeastern sector and Tawang, and now we are back again with a discussion with regards to the trijunction between India, Nepal and China. And China has now found another way to disrupt border trade, border cities, or technically have an upper hand in border disputes, which is water. The fact of the matter is, because some of the most important rivers, Brahmaputra for sure, and we have what we call as the Ghaggar river, which starts in China, goes into Nepal, then goes into India. They originate there. What China is technically doing is that it's creating dams on the upper reaches in order to create an artificial shortage of water downstream, and also when these dams are created, they are putting in military establishments along with it. And as a major concern to us, on the Mabja Sangbo, a river again near the Uttarakhand sector at the trijunction of India, Nepal and China, satellite imagery is telling us that there's a dam being constructed opposite the Kalapani area in Uttarakhand. And these dam embankments technically indicate that China is doing what it did on the Brahmaputra. What they did on the Brahmaputra, they're now doing it in the western sector also. And if you look at the way they are doing it, it is totally to get strategic advantage over India, as the Mabja Zangbo originates in the Tibet sector, flows into Nepal, and then goes into the Ganga in the form of the Ghaggar. And what we see is that they're not making run of what is called run of river dam, which is that you don't disrupt the flow of the dam. They're making a proper reservoir. What is called gravity dams are dangerous generally, because if water is left or is used as a form of weapon, it can flood the downstream, and also it can create drought conditions. Now, for the purpose of the examination, now we have another aspect related to China using environment, water resources, dams as a form of weapon. And this strategy has already been used in the eastern sector, but now in the western sector, China is again creating the context in which this is coming into focus. So the basic point of the matter is, in 2021, China announced that it will construct a massive dam on the Yarlung Zangbo, which is nothing but the Tibetan name of Brahmaputra. And the fact is that this is the precedence on which they are now creating another dam in the western sector. Because when they did this in the western sector, eastern sector, they also created military establishments. Now they're doing the same in the eastern sector also. So east, west, they're taking up the Brahmaputra model and putting it into the west. So here, if you look at the larger implications, this is something which can have an impact on India very directly, because when we talk about diplomacy, when we talk about war, these are very strategic tools which can be used when it comes to either India, Nepal or China, either as a leverage, as a form of leverage, because that 70 gigawatt power dam which is already there on the Brahmaputra itself has a lot of ecological disruption and ecological impact on the northeast itself. Now they're doing it to the alluvial plains of India also via the concept of dams. So what this whole concept is, very simply the topic is talking about Chinese diplomacy and dams as a form of tools of disruption, of escalation and of leverage in disputes. With this, we move to the last topic. See, the last topic is, see Arif, the topic is very simple. We already know that China created a dam on Brahmaputra. And when they created the dam on Brahmaputra, they also created military establishments. There are two types of dams. One is called run-of-river, the other is called gravity dam. When you have run-of-river dam, you don't disrupt the flow of the water. On the other hand, when you have a gravity dam, you put the water in a reservoir, which in turn reduces the flow of water downstream. And therefore, this in turn creates the context in which the downstream, you can now control the flow of water. So that becomes a strategic leverage. China, with all red flags, said that we are doing whatever we are doing within our own territory. It's a matter of our sovereignty. So what they are doing is that any river which is going into India, Bangladesh, they are finding ways to disrupt the flow, to make it a factor in its leverage when it comes to disputes and escalations. Because gravity dams are dangerous. Gravity dams can have both drought and flooding capacity, and that is why this is an interesting and important development in this sector. Satellite data is now showing that they have been constructing for a long time. Now it is showing in the satellite data. Okay, last topic. Last topic is something concerning, and the Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Act has been in the news from time to time. And we've been talking about its performance quite a lot and how it is showing a lot of cracks now. But this article gives us an even bleaker picture with regards to how the average working days. See, MGNREGA guarantees 100 days of work to a rural household, one adult, or an adult of a rural household guaranteed 100 days of work. However, when we're looking at the average data of work which they gave to the people, it is coming to 41-42 days, which is not even half. And what is even more concerning is that states are not utilizing the potential of MGNREGA, and there's an important term which is introduced via this article, which is called person days. So if one person can do 100 days of work based on the population which is seeking employment, they can then multiply it and get the cumulative person days available to a state. Basically, this is the amount of labor which is available to you in a month and then over a year. Now, states know that. But what we see is that when it comes to the utilization of these work days itself or person days itself, not even half or not even 2 to 3 states are using more than 70%. And the basic performance as of right now is hovering at 50 and can go as low as 14%, which is that they're only using 14% of the available work person labor which is there, or person days which is there, which in turn means is that they are not creating the requisite number of jobs. And what is the larger implication here is that if this is going to be the trend, and there are systemic issues which have come up wherein wages are not being given, people are not seeking employment because 4 months delay in wages. They have introduced an app for attendance to a population which cannot own a smartphone itself. And there are systemic issues with the way corruption is also creeping into it. But the point here is that these systemic issues will lead to a shrinkage in the allocated work. And what is going to happen is that the budgetary allocation for MGNREGA will then be cut, because they will say that it is not technically showing the requisite amount of work. Along with that, it is not performing to the optimal level. But this is not because the people are not coming. It's because we have created certain roadblocks within the system, be it state or center. And therefore, when they both come together, it's an issue. So, MGNREGA can work at the optimal level. There is work available also, and there is also a reservoir of person days which they can use. However, they are not using it itself. So again, the basic point of the article, very simply, is that this is creating a precedence for the shrinkage in the budgetary allocation for MGNREGA, and being the world's largest social security scheme and technically guaranteeing right to work. The problem of the matter is that this is how we will destroy MGNREGA itself. It's not performing to the optimal level. We are putting in unnecessary complications, technical difficulties. And when you have guaranteed 100, give 100. So, as on Friday, the average day of employment provided per household is 42 days, while 50 days last year, 52 last to last year, and 48 days 2019-2020, and 51 days only half as of 2018-19. 5 years back, it was technically the aspect related to half of. It needed to be 100, it is technically 50. So the point of the matter is that we are not even close to the guaranteed 100. So the first aspect is that we are not even reaching average. Now if you look further, the reason is that we are choking funds, and this is something again we covered previously, that the state governments are not disbursing money because the center is not giving them money. So there is now a major deficit within the flow itself, and with no wage payment, people are becoming desperate. And if you add to this, the fact of the matter is that there is a supply chain constraint with regards to money, and they are now creating technical complexity. You want to give attendance to the contractor. They have introduced an app. If that person had the capacity to own a smartphone, every household, then why would they work within MGNREGA? So for a person who does not have this much capacity to buy something like that, you want them to give attendance on a mobile phone, which makes no sense. So the basic point of the matter is that the reasons are also the way we are governing the scheme itself. Now, this is a concept which can come in the examination. Please pay attention to this right now, which is that This word has previously not ever been used for MGNREGA within the public sphere. And the aspect is very simple. It's called person days. What does person days mean? It is defined as the total number of work days by a person registered under the scheme in a fiscal year. So, every person can work maximum 100 days, and we know the number of people seeking employment. So, we know that how much person days is available. There is now low utilization of person days when it comes to several states. Arunachal, highest, 63% of the available person days it's using. For example, if there were 100 days available, 100 days of work, meaning 100 days of labor available, they are using 63 days. But you see, Daman and Diu 0%, Lakshadweep 33%. States are at more or less half, and Manipur is at 14%. Meaning whatever was available to them as doing labor, they technically are putting in 14% of that. The Manipur thing, which is at 2.5 crore person days, meaning this was the available labor in the form of people available, 14% they're using. So the point of the matter is that the implication is extremely dangerous. The implication is that the states which were performing well, for example Chhattisgarh, Meghalaya, are now performing bad, and the fiscal outlay will be impacted because the government will very simply say that MGNREGA is not performing. Why are we allocating 20,000 crores when what is being utilized is only 10,000 crores? But that is not the real picture itself. So before I move to the mains question, I would like to revise with you. The basic point of the matter is that we have done 5 very important topics. One related to art and culture, one related to social issues and population data. Art and culture, I've told you 3 very basic concepts. You need to now be very, very wary of the UNESCO World Heritage Site list which comes through. Do we get that tag? Second, there's a statement which says that there is no UNESCO World Heritage Site in Northeast. That statement is totally correct. And we need to make sure that we are now understanding the structure of the Maidans and what is the dynasty related to it, Ahom kingdom, their basic rule, their time period, and the personality linked to the Ahom kingdom and the Mughal connection, and how the Ahoms fought the British, because Ahoms connect the Mughal and the British both, because it's till 1826. In 1826 they were technically usurped by the British. So they in turn go into the second half of or the first half of 19th century also. First. Second, we discussed how governance impacts population and how artificial ways of controlling population only creates roadblocks or systemic issues, and once you are on the slope, it's very hard to come back out of it. And the basic point here is very simple, that China created this problem for itself, one child policy, and they are now trying to go for 3 child, but behavioral changes within the Chinese population was not taken into account. But for us, this is a moment of opportunity. We can use our demographic dividend, we can use our population to come out of the because we as of right now are not the preferred manufacturing zone or location. Vietnam, Bangladesh are cheaper, but with China in crisis, we can actually use our systemic issues or our what we call as advantage. See, and one of you asked me this question, is population good or bad? Population till a point is good, but it's better to have a bigger population, to have a very old, and that too population, what is the age of the population, mean age, it matters. You can have a population which is very big but all of them are 50 plus, then it's a useless, because your labor force is aging. You need to have a young nation. That is why people call us a young nation. And thereafter, once we understood this, we saw how dams water flow are now being used by China in the larger, what is called McMahon line, the eastern and the western sector. We already saw what happened in Brahmaputra sector. Now we are seeing that they're doing it in the western sector also. Fourth topic, we understood the aspect of the measles and the rubella vaccination. How we are having a very important target by the end of this year. We can reach that 95% mark, but we need that push for 5%. And the last topic was related to MGNREGS. It's a very important scheme. We use it as a badge of honor that we technically have a right to work based scheme giving guaranteed 100 days, but the reality is we're not even giving 40% or 50% of that. And over and above that, we have created the roadblocks ourselves. And if not, we have also created the context in which we will technically cut the budgetary allocation because it did not impact in the larger run. So this is a very big problem within MGNREGA. It is a very important scheme. A lot of people rely on it. States are not utilizing because they don't have the money to disburse, which is technically a central responsibility. So with this, let us discuss the mains questions. First question, in the context of China's population problem, discuss the opportunities India has as a nation. Basically, in this examination, you need to understand the Chinese aspect also. So to tell them the population problem, what is it? But how is it an opportunity for India? Second, the poor performance of MGNREGA on key indicators should be a wake-up call for policymakers. Comment. Very simply, the fact of the matter is that if MGNREGA is not going to perform to its optimal capacity, it will only backfire as a larger scheme and the budgetary allocation will go down. A lot of people rely on it. Just make sure that when you write this answer, don't become too negative. Just have to balance the answer. You can't criticize the government too much. You have to keep it a little bit balanced in that sense. So with this, I would like to end this session. Thank you so much for your patience. I will see you in the next Saturday, Sunday session. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.